Hello and welcome to another My NT/ND marriage video. I wanted to talk about self-awareness. Kind of touched on that in the mind blindness video. So how that looks for us. In the early days, when hubby and I were really kind of struggling to sort of gel in those first few years, with me not understanding what was going on but knowing that something was amiss. I couldn't reason with him, I couldn't logic with him, we couldn't discuss anything without it going around in this weird ass, pardon my French, this weird ways. Like you couldn't get a straight sort of argument, a straight line, a straight consequence. It was just all over the shop. And I was just wondering, and so confused, what is going on here? And so we're not particularly gelling, we're not particularly getting along. And he would often talk to me about his friends' relationships, what they were like with their girlfriends, what their girlfriends were like with them, the struggles and things they were facing. And I was often saying to him, don't worry about what's going on in other people's backyards, worry about what's going on in yours. And I was desperately wanting him to sit with me and work through our issues. And don't worry about what your friends are facing, let's try and figure out our own stuff. And he couldn't really see, like he was kind of in this frame of mind that his friends were having shitty relationships. Oops, I swore again, sorry. His friends were having crappy relationships and we were kind of coasting along. It was kind of strange. And so he was not really aware of things that were happening around him. Cut to, sort of more recent years. He loves watching shows like The Farmer Wants a Wife and Married at First Sight. Keep in mind that TV is kind of his special interest in that it's probably the thing that he does the absolute most. And he does a lot of it. Loves his telly. Anyway, so he loves watching those shows because he likes watching other people try to navigate their relationships. And it kind of gives him a sense of, I guess, pride. That they're struggling as well, like they've not got it down pat and it's all kind of going AWOL for them as well. And it's really fascinating because sometimes there'll be people on the show who resemble his behaviour or my behaviour, and he's completely unaware. He doesn't see a person doing something and think, hey, that's like you. Or, oh, I do that too. He's not sort of watching it for that reason to begin with, but he wouldn't notice it even if it came up and slapped him in the face. It's just how he rolls. So there was one particular character on Married at First Sight who I thought acted particularly like my husband. And I was kind of watching it and going, I've seen that behaviour before. And hubby was completely unaware. He's watching this guy and he's having words about him like, oh, what an idiot, da 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 da. And I'm kind of secretly, quietly in my mind thinking, that's interesting because you're very similar. So I wrote down what this guy was like, and I'll just read it out. So he blamed his partner for his moods. He was paired with, obviously, this bubbly, spontaneous, sort of vixen type lass who, she was really quite sexual, wore some lovely clothes, she was vivacious and bubbly. And yeah, it was just, I don't know, it was kind of hard to watch him kind of taking her down 50 pegs. It wasn't even a peg or two, it was 50 pegs. So anytime he was in a mood, it was her fault. He didn't acknowledge his part in his moods or his anger. Anytime he was having a mood or he was angry, it was always her fault. It was always her causing it. It was never him saying, hey, I'm feeling angry and I'm being a douche and I shouldn't do this. So a lot of blaming. He made her feel bad about herself And that was really hard to watch, because here she is, this lively young lady, and he's just making her feel like, not specifically saying you suck or you're crap or you're whatever, but just taking her down with his negativity and his moods and his aggro and blaming her. And you could just kind of see the light disappearing from her eyes. He got angry way too often. I mean, everything. Oh God. There was this one time they were sitting on a hill having a picnic, and she was talking about something, I think the scenery, and he's just zoned out. I don't know where he was, but he was not present. So she says something and he doesn't reply. It was almost like he didn't know how to reply. And then he gives this silly kind of vague answer that was almost a change of subject. And she's kind of looking at him like, what? She mentions this later, that she feels like they were struggling to connect. Bam, he's gone. He's lost it. And I was sitting there thinking, I know that one, sadly. He rarely built her up. Outside of sex and telling her how hot she was and what a great body she had during sex and things like this. Well, when I say during, obviously they're not showing the during. But after, just after, they would have a chat with them and they would speak. And he would talk about how, sexy she is and hot she is and good in bed she is and what a good lover and things like this. But outside of that, he didn't build her up. He didn't tell her that she was good at anything else. He could not read her body language to save himself. For example, when they're sitting on that hill having the picnic and she has this bit of a sentence about what it is she's talking about, and then he glosses over and she's there with this puzzled look on her face. He had no clue. Other times when he was talking to her about things and she wasn't particularly interested, he didn't pay attention. If he was insulting or offending her and she had that kind of owl look on her face, he didn't notice or pay attention. He just couldn't see it. He had no problem yelling at her until she cried. And then he would leave her like that. And he did that way too often. Like, I was just bothered by this guy. Like, what are you doing? How are you doing this to her? Why are you doing this to her? She's this really lovely young lady, and you're just ripping her a new bumhole while she's shattered, broken down, and he's still going and blaming her and blaming her and blaming her. And she was trying to turn it around and be logical and reasonable and obviously get him to stop, obviously to get him to see that, his perspective wasn't exactly accurate, and also, why are you yelling? But yeah, she was just always in tears, and I was just like, it's too soon in the relationship for her to be in that much turmoil. And in saying that, my husband isn't like that simply because I'm not a crier. It's rare for me to just burst into tears. It's rare for me to cry about anything. And when he yells at me, my go-to is not to cry. I don't, he doesn't, reduce me to tears. I am far more likely to be aggro about being yelled at. I'm far more likely to sort of cross my arms and frown at him and then ask him if he's finished and, things like this. So aside from the fact that she cried a lot, that's a difference between her and myself, or her situation and my situation. But my husband would yell a lot like this guy and not pay attention to the damage that it was doing. Like, he was just completely clueless. He would think that my standing there not crying meant that I was probably okay. But I don't even know if my husband yelled at me and I did cry. I don't even know what he would do. I've never done it to find out because I'm not big on crying. It's just not something that happens with me much. So I don't know. I should do some acting classes and just put it on and see what happens, just for curiosity's sake. because I wonder if he would stop. I know that there were situations where bad things were happening and I was crying, and that didn't make him stop. But anyway, just a random thought from me. He had serious double standards. What was good for him was not good for her. Yes. So he would yell and reduce her to tears and not listen and not read her body language and not build her up. And if she did anything remotely similar in return, bam, he's lost it again. Anger was definitely his go-to, and blaming was his next go-to. So yeah, I was watching that and just thinking, that's my lived situation here on this show. And granted, I actually don't watch the show that much, kind of bothers me, but that's a whole nother story. But watching that particular guy, I just could relate. But obviously the point of this video is that hubby couldn't relate. He didn't watch that and think, oh, that guy's doing what I do. He was completely unaware, and he usually is unaware. So a few more examples of self-awareness. I think another sign of lack of self-awareness is yelling at your partner when you know you don't when you know you don't like that yourself. That's relatively self-aware, because you wouldn't be thinking, hey, I'm yelling, I'm doing this very thing to my partner that I don't like being done to me. I think that's a big part of lack of self-awareness. Not noticing the effect that you're having on those around you, although that could be a mind blindness thing. And this is where it gets a little bit tricky, I suppose, a little bit of overlap. Anyway, so that's a bit of an example of lack of self-awareness, and I know that this is something that people on the spectrum do have in common. I would say that this is a common trait, if not 100% across the board. They're all this way. And when it comes to traits, it can be a little bit hard to know which is their spectrum and which is their personality. But I would say lack of self-awareness and having mind blindness are traits that they all share. Anyway, hopefully you found this video enlightening. Love to hear from you, comment below, and thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video.